my left, to my random direction, is going to be Carolyn. Please introduce yourself, Carolyn.
I'm Caroline. I'm with Less Than 3 Games. I'm in the Pacific Northwest of the U.S., and I'm really excited to be here.
What games have you made?
Oh, I've made Downfall, which has some asymmetric roles within it. And the current project I'm working on right now is called Fedor Noir, which also has some asymmetry involved.
All right, Ben.
I'm Ben Robbins. I made a Microscope, but really probably more relevant to today's discussion, I made Kingdom, which is a very asymmetric game. I also played, I ran Story Game Seattle for about 8 years, which is where I met and played with a ton of fantastic gamers, including Caroline and just a lot of other people, and it really explored a lot of games like this, and we played a ton of Kingdom.
Very nice. Spencer.
Hello, I'm Spencer Campbell. I publish under the moniker Gila RPGs. If you know me, you probably know me from Corvid Court or from Slayers, which is my asymmetric monster hunting game, which is why I'm here today. I use he, him pronouns.
And Sasha.
Hi, I'm Sasha Moros. My pronouns are they and she. I made 3 games that deal in asymmetric stuff. In heavy asymmetric stuff, which are off bodies, off pieces, and enticement. All to different degrees. Some of them more like the thematic asymmetry of storytelling, and some more in like strict GM player relationships.
Wonderful. And as I said, Jason Pitre, he, him. I've done 2 asymmetric role-playing games in different styles. One was very recent, which was Palanquin, or Palanquin, depending on your pronunciation. And earlier on, I did a game called Posthuman Pathways, which had a very strong asymmetry. So I will be moderating this little panel and taking any questions. So if you have any questions and you're watching the stream chat, please feel free to type in question plus your question, and we'll try to get to them as if time permits. So now let's get to this. What is an asymmetrical game? Let's let everyone have a chance. So let's start with Sasha.
So I think like the 2 big ways of defining asymmetry for me is like because we're dealing in TTRPGs, is rules and storytelling. And because it's TTRPGs, those 2 things interact for me very strongly. So we like saying that especially like as a lyric game designer, I would tend to say that when there's difference in storytelling between players, when there's different storytelling tendencies or storytelling tasks, even if they're not defined as rules, they still behave very similarly to rules. So it's to me like there's this difference in authority, in what you have to shoulder in the story, what you're telling, that kind of stuff.
All right, Ben, what are your thoughts?
I think what Sasha says is 100% right. That the distinction between like fictional control, like do I make up different elements of the world versus actual mechanical rules being different. And I think a big thing, of course, is also questions of like, can you change? Like D&D, for example, is asymmetric, and there's a GM and there's players, but that's rigid, that's set. Whereas in other games, you can change what roles you have. Maybe having overlapping roles, like all those questions are very important. But basically, it's the it's how you're playing the game differently than the other players, and not just because you chose to, but because the rules are telling you to play the game differently.
What do you think, Caroline?
I think in all games, we're able to bring our own voices to the fiction, and we're all going to embody characters and create stories differently. But I think what stands out in an asymmetric game is that as players, we have at different points in the game different avenues for changing the fiction more directly. And so an asymmetric game to me is one where players have differences in how they can impact the fiction, how they can be a narrator within the story.
And Spencer.
Yeah, I think everybody has really kind of nailed it so far. Just to kind of emphasize, for me, when I think about asymmetrical games, I do think more in the spectrum of mechanical differences in terms of asymmetry. So for me, an asymmetrical game is almost like a series of mini games that are all in the same box. We see that in like the board game space, and I think we can see that in some role-playing games too, where everybody is quite literally doing something very different from one another, yet our mechanics are running smoothly and we're telling a cool story, as my fellow panelists have mentioned.
Yeah, I think getting to kind of leaving off what Spencer said, it's like there's a difference between a game where it's asymmetrical because you have a different victory condition, like I'm trying to achieve a different goal, versus a game where I'm mechanically doing something different to achieve maybe the same goal or maybe a different goal. I think the second part, the playing differently, is a much more interesting asymmetric space than like, oh, we just have different goals, because we're still playing the same, but we just have different agendas, which is not, I think, really as interesting of a
So, I have an analytical framework that I tend to use for games in the 4 structures: system, setting, subtext, and situation. And I view that there can be asymmetry on all 4 of these axes. System, you can have mechanical differences between the different participants. Setting, you can have characters who are representing different portions of the setting. One of my favorite examples of this is the 13 Warriors, where it's a bunch of Vikings.
Oh, that,
and
yeah, okay, right. The movie, right.
And a Moorish poet from one of the southern caliphates. And like, yes, you are a totally different portion of this setting. So you're coming into it with different goals. There can be different subtext. So I'm dealing with the themes of warfare and trauma, whereas you're dealing with the themes of familial relationships and obligations. And then you can also have it in different situations. So we're all cyberpunks going on this job, but I'm actually the boss in charge of this, and you're my minions. And we've got these like different power differentials, and we're representing different portions of the broader situation that is driving us into play. So that's sort of how I use that analytical framework fairly often, and I view that each of these different areas can have a different level of asymmetry, and actually nothing's even across all of these. You're always going to have variation on at least one of these axes. Or it's rather boring, honestly. We all have the same rules, come from the same place, have the same role in our group, and we're all exploring the same themes. I mean, maybe Fiasco?
I would also throw in that, like, if you have it depends on the story you're telling. If you're telling a story about like one entity, then using symmetry is not as useful. Then symmetry is useful because you're all telling the story about the same person, just like taking turns or interjecting with each other or something. So then you don't need it. But as soon as you start playing with characters or with different actors, then asymmetry starts to surface because people have different play styles. People want to play in different ways, but want to tell stories in different ways. And I think a lot of good game design will try to support that in some ways. We'll try to set it up. We'll try to give people like opportunities. So I think like when we talk about these different axes, if I see like a kind of asymmetry on one of these axes, I would probably try to also support that with asymmetry on other axes, just to give like more structural support, more narrative support, more support for like people doing that.
There's also maybe we're sliding too much into a neutral zone in that I'm not sure just everybody having different things is asymmetry, right? If we each have a different theme, we aren't doing the same thing, but we're having perfectly even slices of the pie, right? It's kind of a different filling in the blank. Maybe that's not asymmetry. I mean, it seems like that's just symmetrical, but evenly divvying things up.
So the reason why I think it's asymmetrical is because the fiction can be unbalanced towards different fictional poles.
Right.
So if you are playing in a game that's about the aforementioned warfare and trauma versus family and obligations, and you're playing Grey Ranks, where it's all about Polish child soldiers, you're going to have an asymmetrical relationship to these things, because one of these is going to have a much stronger influence than the other in a given portion of the game, perhaps. So the fact that the fiction can move around and certain people will have the spotlight in certain portions of the game, and then other people will have the spotlight in other portions of the game based on where the fiction moves around, that's sort of why I'm viewing it as asymmetrical, as opposed to something like a D&D. You are all part of a cohesive group going into a dungeon. Your common themes are, you are going into the dungeon to slay orcs to get money.
See, but I don't think that's true, though. I think if you take that definition, then in any role-playing game, at any moment, the spotlight could be more intense on someone, even if it's D&D and we're just in town and talking to my temple because it's all about my temple. I think
that's the thing.
Yeah.
When you're in town talking to the temple, people split apart.
No, but at the table, we're only playing one game at a time, right? If we spend an hour talking to Fred's character, no one else is playing. The game has suddenly, it's like we're playing Primetime Adventures, right? But now the story is about Fred's character because that's it.
Yeah.
But I don't think I think that's just social, organic. Sometimes people have more attention than others. I'm not sure I'd really call that truly asymmetric gaming. Sasha.
Yeah. I mean, I'm also looking at things like the hacker in Shadowrun, where it's like, no, you have an entire game over here.
That makes more sense to me. That makes more sense to me.
Like, I think Shadowrun actually is a really good example because I don't know, like, for me, whenever I play Shadowrun, the face is getting the face has a very specific burden to carry as like a role player, because they have to interact with the NPCs, they have to lead the conversations, they have to bring like social roleplay, which other people don't have to bring into the scene. Even though the rules are very similar, their fictional role makes for a very different playstyle, makes for a very different burden to carry as part of the storytelling group. And I think that's just like a way that I tend to think about asymmetry is not just thinking about authority and difference in rules, but difference in burdens, like differences in how people want to take part of a game, and giving them these different options, and also recognizing that they are different and that they need to be supported. For example, if I have a face in a group, then that player needs to know what they're going into, and they might need to have some kind of support structures in as part of the game, which make sure that if they feel like it's getting too much for them, other players can help them out or something. So and I think the games are stronger when we recognize that asymmetry in just roles.
Spencer.
I think that point right there is the thing that's so kind of beautiful about asymmetrical games, or games that really lean into asymmetry, is that they allow for different play styles in the same game. So like this concept that you you were describing of taking on different burdens. I have friends who some of them are their faces in real life. They're just those incredibly charismatic people, and so they're going to be excited to take on a role like that. But then I also have friends who are very introverted but want to play, and if the game doesn't have systems in place that are going to allow that burden to shift around organically, baked into the game, then it's up to us as a table to somehow figure that out. And so I think games that really lean into their asymmetry and kind of give you advice on how to do that burden, I think that's fantastic. I think that's the wonderful thing about these types of games.
But something we're saying that all sorry, Caroline, go ahead.
I think if I were to put games on kind of a spectrum between symmetrical and asymmetrical, that kind of helps me to think about how they work. So for example, when I was brainstorming, okay, what would be, I had an easy time thinking about asymmetrical games. Thinking about perfectly symmetrical games is a little harder. Fiasco was the one that I felt fit the most firmly, in that where the spotlight's going to move around while we're playing, but every player has the same thing they're doing on their turn. There's very little choice about what you are going to do fictionally. No one player has more narrative responsibility or power than another player. if you go look into something like Microscope or Epitaph, you are still having, everyone has the same power, the same kind of moves that they can do, but there's that choice that Sasha pointed out about different ways that you can choose to engage with the fiction. So you can skew it, you can make it more asymmetrical by player choice. But then there's games like Polaris or Shock, where there's a very rigid player role that you don't have a choice about where you're going to, how you're going to be able to contribute to the fiction. It's mapped out for you in the rules of the game. And those games deal with that asymmetry by having simultaneous stories going, where players are doing each of the roles within their own story.
That's a good question. Actually, because before we hit this panel, I had been making notes and I was like, oh yeah, asymmetrical, Shock, and Polaris. I don't know if everyone here has played Shock and Polaris, but we Caroline and I kind of grew up on Shock and Polaris, so they're like mainstays in our culture. But then I was thinking about it, I was like, I don't know if they're asymmetrical. The more I thought about it, because it's like, so in Shock, for example, we usually played a 3-player, and you're playing either an antagonist or a protagonist, and you're doing both. You're just taking turns. Like if I'm playing in your story where you're the protagonist, I'm now playing my antagonist, and we go around the table in pairs like that. So we're doing different things, but we're all doing the same things. We're just taking different turns doing the same things, you know? And like, so I'm not sure that's asymmetrical. And then likewise, Polaris, you have 4 people exactly, and you've got this relationship with the person across from you, antagonist, protagonist, but that just keeps moving around. You're always either in that role, the directing, or the tennis role, the directly opposing, or you're on the sidelines, and it just keeps moving around depending on whose turn it is. So everyone's actually doing exactly the same thing, just at different times. So I was like, wait, that's actually not asymmetrical at all. That's just...
And as a designer, I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, I bet both of those designers decided to do those games that way, where you have those simultaneous stories where you're taking turns doing that, because there's kind of a draw towards symmetry. There's a draw in GM-less spaces, particularly, about giving players the same responsibilities and asking them to do the same things for equality, which I think is great.
Well, I think historically, right, we had decades of D&D, or D&D like games, and we had this relationship of like the GM and the players, and the idea of like, what if we tried to make everybody equal was this radical idea, right? And so I think it's weird it makes perfect sense. You'd go from like GM, total asymmetry, let's have perfect equality, even if it varies. So then to kind of swing back around, it's like, hey, why can we make things uneven again, but like healthy uneven? Is to me, that's the interesting question. Can we make it not just, I say tyranny in a nice way. I don't, tyranny in the sense that one player is in control of a big chunk of the thing. Can we make it be uneven but still cool? Is the interesting part. Sasha, you probably got a hand up.
Yeah, go ahead, Sasha.
No, the thing that I need to gather myself. But the thing that when we talk about like making things uneven but in an interesting way, I think I lost my point. Okay, no, Jason, you go first. I need to regather my point.
So there was actually a couple comments in the chat that are worthwhile bringing up. What is the difference between asymmetry and difference? And more interestingly, there's a difference between asymmetric play and asymmetric design.
100% both.
So Polaris is asymmetric play, and it's a natural. Well, no, it's asymmetric play. At any instance of play, it's asymmetric.
Right.
But the design is symmetrical.
But couldn't you say that about almost any game? It's like if we're in a D&D fight and it's my turn to go, I'm rolling dice and you're not. I think it gets very. We're kind of reducing the interest in that topic. I think there's much more interesting.
There's a lot of interesting portions to this. So Sasha.
But maybe it's not interesting trying to define what is asymmetric and what is not, because then we're talking about binaries. There are no binaries. But there are no like concrete things. So I think it's interesting to talk about how to recognize that storytelling is, as we explored in this is all kind of asymmetric in some ways, is inherently somewhat asymmetric, because people tell stories differently. If you have different people telling stories, it's going to be somewhat asymmetric. So I think the interesting question for me isn't what is an asymmetric game, but how and why. Why should we as designers lean into that asymmetry, and why would we do that? Why would we do that? How can we do that? It's more interesting to me than defining when it is really asymmetric, because it's always going to be asymmetric in some ways, because like setting and like storytelling demands it in some way.
I'd like to follow up on that,
Spencer.
because I think that's really important. Asking why would we do this? Why would we try and make designs that are inherently asymmetrical? And it's sort of, as I mentioned earlier, it's because it allows for multiple play styles, right? So just to use my own game, for example, Slayers is a monster hunting game, and the asymmetry comes in the combat. So people roll dice differently when they're fighting these monsters. And the game itself has classes that I would say are easy classes, and then classes that are complex classes. And I've got friends who would be interested in playing a monster hunting game, but have no interest in really learning any kind of rules, or certainly heavy rules. And so by giving them a game that says, well, you can buy into this as much as you want, we're opening up our games to a wider range of folks. And I think that's super, super important.
Actually, another totally different angle. I think that's totally true, but another totally different angle from my point of view is that by being asymmetrical, by letting people contribute to different aspects of the fiction or different aspects of the story, or push it in different ways, you can actually create, I don't want to say antagonism, because that's not what I mean, but conflict or interesting tension in the game. If all of us at the table are just controlling the same aspects of the game, it's rather like head to head. Like, I say this happens, you say this happens. Okay, that's cool. We're just negotiating. But like Kingdom, for example, by divvying up the ways different players can influence what's happening in the fiction, we are creating a more complicated story for each other that we cannot easily predict and control. And so it's interesting. We're surprised. We're like, oh, you get to decide what happens if we make this decision, but I decide how people feel about it. Right? We're slicing the pie up in different ways, and it makes us kind of go. It helps us be surprised by each other, which is really the fun part of games in general, right? And even when we think we kind of agree, because we're not adding things in nice even order, we wind up creating more challenging situations that are exciting.
Sasha.
I think, I think like a big part that's like comes out of that too is that if everyone has like all of the things to keep up with, like all of the storytelling to care about, then it gets very messy. Then there's a big burden on everyone to keep track of every little thing, to prepare everything. And I think there's a really big relief in knowing what your role in the story is, like in being able to prepare for that role. Like, and that can be the GM, that can be knowing that in Kingdom I will decide the rules that are to come, or that I will have to think about the reaction of that people are going to have. And that's also like obviously like when we talk about like traditional TTRPGs also applies to the different like roles people take on in the party, and it very much also applies to when we talked about like TTRPGs going in the direction of saying, okay, how can we have like no dice, no masters in a way. When we talk about games like this, like belonging outside belonging games, they also very much divide up like storytelling responsibility through the setting elements. Which like say like, okay, you are going to play the gangs that are roaming through the streets, or you're going to play the mystical things in the ground, and that's also like gives people specific roles to think about and then prepare things and surprise others, which pretty nice to do. Like,
Has anyone here ever played the Dune board game? The old Dune board game? It's
I-
like
I held it in my hands and almost bought it, and then put it down.
No, dude, it's so good. No, it's so good. Particularly
It was a
the stuff you're
huge
talking about.
Yeah,
mistake.
it is so good.
Yeah, and the stuff you're talking about in your game design, you really want to play it. But it's interesting because it is true. It is like the most asymmetric thing ever, right? It's so asymmetric, so much so that when you play it twice in a row and you switch to a different faction, you have to just completely rewire your brain, or you get crushed because you're playing the game completely differently with different goals and different methods. But what's interesting, I think, kind of getting back to kind of the stuff that you were saying, Sasha, about that we each have a different way of participating. The other thing that's interesting is that then you, like with Dune, you can be you are all competing to win, but you're not in the same niche. You're kind of operating at different levels. So it's like I could be down here making all this progress, and you're up here making all this progress. We're not really competing head to head, and yet we all feel like we're we're pursuing our agenda. So it's like it allows you competitive play that is not directly competitive, not exactly head to head. But Caroline, do you play it?
Oh, a long time ago. We did not get
Yeah.
very far. Someone won very early.
Was it you? Was it?
It was not me. I would remember it better if it were me.
Similar sort of thing you see with Root, the board game, which I think we were talking about in our pre-going live thing, where if you want to play the Vagabond, you don't have to be in conflict with anybody. Technically, you could just go scampering around in the forest and digging around in ruins and have so much fun, while other two people are actually literally at war with one another. And then you can kind of choose the playstyle that fits what you're looking for that evening as you sit down at the table.
I think,
Sasha.
like that kind of leads me to like a point that's kind of interesting to me, which is like in video games, when we design video games, like a thing that is a big part of flow design is to think about dynamic difficulty adjustment. So giving players the opportunity to adjust the difficulty of play while they do it. And I think we have a very similar thing that we can have going on in TTRPGs, where we can have like dynamic like agency or involvement or like narrative role adjustment, where you can like adjust your role while you're playing, where you can like choose like the kind of narrative involvement you want to have when you like pick a class and pick like a role, or like in Kingdom when I would be like, okay, I don't want to do that with my character anymore. I'm kind of exhausted from that kind of play. I can switch to something else. Like I can like combine my needs as a player with my storytelling, and that creates both more interesting storytelling because it pushes us into different directions, and allows us to have like a more like pleasant play experience.
Yeah, no,
I think
100% right. I think what. Oh, go ahead, Caroline.
I think that also highlights something that I think about as a designer when I'm making an asymmetric game is in some of these games, you have the opportunity to choose and change and engage in different ways throughout the game. In other games, you're starting play, and the decision that you make at the beginning of what role you're going to take is going to impact how you're able to interact with the fiction. And as a designer, I think it's so important to be able to telegraph that information very early, so that players can make really good informed decisions about what they're going to be doing. In a game where everyone's doing the same thing throughout, that there's no initial decision that can kind of like railroad you somewhere you don't want to be.
Yeah, it's really sad to be like, oh, I'm in the role and I didn't understand it. And now I don't like it, and I don't want to play a dwarf anymore. It's too complicated. It's no fun.
I think
I think
kind of
okay,
like,
go ahead.
No.
Go ahead, Sasha.
You're in the middle of talking.
I was just saying that what Spencer said before. I realized. So Spencer was saying the thing about the like the complexity of play. The like, oh, I want to play a simple class. I want to play a more complicated class. I think that exact thing. It makes sense in a tactical game, but it also translates completely to like story games, role playing games, things like that too. Or you know what I mean? Not more narrative games. I mean, not tactical games. Like if you're playing Kingdom, if you're playing like a role like Power, it's like whatever I do is what I do. I'm not thinking meta. I just make actions and those are the thing. But if I'm playing Perspective, I'm doing a much more complicated. I'm figuring out what I think the future should be, and kind of like what you were saying, Sasha, that those different roles give you different. They require different load on your creative brain, that you have to kind of do different things to fulfill each of those roles. Some are very easy and organic, and some are much more like thinky, plotty.
So yeah, this is fascinating. We could have this conversation for 5 hours solid. So I think I've seen probably 3 different major modes of asymmetrical game design that take it from radically different perspectives. One is the rotating roles approach. This is what we found in Polaris, Shock, Downfall, Posthuman Pathways, etc. Whereby, for this scene, everyone has this particular set of distributions of authorities. Then we move those around. So, you're playing different parts of the game in each scene. There is the sort of the archipelago model, which is everyone has thematic and fictional bits that they're in charge of. They're using the same system, so it is effectively roll 2d6 to do a thing with your fictional domain. Everyone is still rolling 2d6, but my fictional domain is the storm, and yours is wine and revelry. Okay. So there's a lot of asymmetry in where the fiction goes, but mechanically you're identical. And then you get the true asymmetry, which are the kingdoms, the roots of the world, where you are, everyone has their own unique mechanics. Slayers is also in that category for combat. Everyone has their own unique mechanics that interact with the greater system, and these different components interact with each other. I was doing some mega game design, and it was actually quite fascinating because that's what it was. It was a vast asymmetrical game where each subcomponent had their own entire minigame that hooked together with a common currency and common information exchanges. And I think that is the truest form of asymmetrical design, and where we have the most room to grow. At least in my opinion. Spencer.
I want to echo that because I'm excited because you talk about it growing. Because to talk about my game once more, I ran a game jam for Slayers afterwards, and I invited people to add to the game, to make whatever you wanted, any kind of class, anything, and make whatever rules. So you could do dice stacking, you could do cards, you could play with dominoes for all you want. Everybody's still playing Slayers at the same time, but they're doing it very differently. And so I agree, and I think that's the thing that's most exciting to me about asymmetry games is that we have the ability to push the envelope on RPGs in a really cool way now with some of this stuff. Once people realize that that's allowed, because I think a lot of people didn't realize that you could do that. Like, I think many of us are just still used to, from the trad gaming perspective, are used to this idea of we all follow the rules. And so I think that's one of the exciting things, for me at least.
Sasha.
I think, because you mentioned following the rules and that kind of and that adding on to the rules, I think something that I've experimented with in Of Bodies is the idea that a lot of if you look at a lot of storytelling games that can have have rules that are very easy to understand. You understand what's going on. You become a designer while playing in that way, where you become where you develop the ability to judge how the rules impact the game, what they do with the game, and how that develops. And I think something that I wanted to use in Of Bodies and experiment with is using that and having part of the game be to consent and modify the rules or add to them and say, okay, I kind of want the GM to get these additional things. I want to take this this thing that the GM could do and give it to the players, or move something from agenda to agenda, or something like that. And embrace try to teach the players the rule in a way, the players, including the GM and stuff, the rules in a way where they can make hacking them as to part of the game and adding to them as part of the game. To then also further develop that symmetry into the kind of asymmetry that they want, and that they personally would like to have in their game.
Yeah. So since we're all really interested in effectively the true asymmetrical games, by this completely objective categorization.
Caroline's
Caroline's
bring it on.
For clarity, I have literally designed the other two types, and I'm super jealous and wish I could design a true asymmetrical.
But why? I mean, I think that's the real question. I'm not sure the one's better than the other. I think it's just. I mean, I don't think you're saying they are. I'm just saying. I think it's it's like a tool for a purpose, right?
Exactly. But so let's talk about the strengths and the weaknesses of the true asymmetrical and asymmetrical design on a whole. So, for instance, a really good strength that I see is replayability. experience of play is radically different. The more asymmetrical the game is, the more different the game is. I have played Kingdom, and I was lucky enough to have moved between Touchstone and Power at one point. And the game changed completely on me. But I could have gone the entire game just staying in a single role, just dealing with this corner of this slice of the pie. And it would have given me a radically different experience from my neighbor who is entirely dealing with the other corner of the pie. So I think replayability is a huge thing, and that goes up nearly exponentially the more roles you have. Because you get things like, in Dune, for instance, what happens in Dune when you swap out the Harkonnens and put in the Talaxin instead?
Oh, yeah.
Everything
Yeah.
breaks and
And
changes.
I think the thing we haven't talked about is also not just the role that you play, but the role that the combination of roles at the table, right? Like if we're using Kingdom as an example, but like, 3 people are power, 1 person's touchstone, it's 2 perspectives, 2 touchdowns, like the combinations, the possible combinations radically change the game. Whereas I think there's some games that are, you know what I mean? Like where all the roles are necessary, you have to have like a more of a balance necessarily. But I think it's segue into a different thing though. I think you were talking about the strengths and weaknesses. There's the dark side. Let's talk about the dark side of asymmetric play, everybody. The dark side. Like the dark side
GM'd games are symmetric.
Wait, what did you say?
I don't think GM'd games are symmetric. I think they're very asymmetric, and it's maybe the dark side of when.
They're totally asymmetric.
Yeah. So the dark side to me is like one player has way too much control and everyone else feels steamrolled.
Exactly. And I was even say non-GM games where that can happen, where if it's like if there's a we're playing Fiasco, any example that's theoretically balanced, one person, like I could just keep talking during this panel. I could just go on and on and on, and you guys would be like, why won't he shut up? I mean, that can happen at any table, right? Unless the rules can stop it. I guess even if the rules try to stop it, people can still just keep talking and talking.
The rules. Sasha, talk now. No more Ben.
No, but like
Wait, but was that rules or was that just player intervention? That was social player intervention.
It's
Good
ruling.
job.
It's rulings, not rules.
The thing is, like, we said right now that is like a problem with asymmetric rules, but I think it can also be like, it can be a strength because, as you just said, it can happen in Fiasco too. But in Fiasco, we don't know that it's happening. In a game with the GM, or in a game like Kingdom, or in a game like in any game, like any kind of asymmetric game, like when I see the different roles, I can prepare myself on how they will interact with the game, and I can write into the rule advice and stuff that people should maybe not go overboard with them, and maybe give like moments. Like maybe give safety mechanics for the other players to intersect and to interject with the other rules and say, hey, give us some space with that, or to veto if they just steamroll their characters or something, because their role can do that. So I think asymmetric rules can be very good at actually like flagging that and then also giving tools to handling it.
Spencer.
One thing I want to mention, based off of what Carolyn mentioned about GMs having so much power in some of these games, and that's certainly an asymmetrical power balance, is there's also the responsibility of the rules and knowing the rules, because I know that certain games take different perspectives on who's responsible for knowing the rules and who's the arbitrator of the rules. And when we have games that have 10 plus different roles that all play the game very differently, and a GM, does the GM have to know how to play all of those or all the rules of all those roles? As a table, you have to come up with an understanding about who's going to take on that cognitive load, because that could be daunting for somebody. And it can be the sort of task that, again, if a new player says, well, this game sounds really cool, but I have to learn how all these other 9 roles work. I just want to know this. That's one of those kind of dark side things that we're talking about here.
So I would actually like to redeem the dark side. Specifically, I'd like to point out Dog Eat Dog. Dog Eat Dog, for those who haven't checked it out, is a game of colonialism. And the richest player at the table takes the place of the colonizer. Yes, you have to have that awkward conversation about money. It's great. But all of the rules are intentionally designed to be using broken social scripts of an abusive GM to replicate the social dynamics of an abusive colonizer. For instance, you roll the dice, and if the colonizer doesn't like the outcome, they can fiat overrule what the dice said. So it is intentionally using the asymmetric, dysfunctional GM role for a thematic reason, which actually gives it a lot more richness. Like there's a lot of nuance there. And I mean, a lot of this comes down to the old classic GM-less, how are we distributing our authorities discussions. Do we have a lot of power in one and equal low levels of power in the others? Do you have 2 GMs and 3 players? Do you have 4 GMs and 1 player?
I just thought we'd come to the point where you could say classic and GM-less in the same sentence.
I know isn't it great?
Good old fashioned GM-less.
So well, here's the fun question: when did the Forge start?
Oh, I don't know, late 90s. Yeah.
It's 2020.
What was the first GM-less game? Right, you got to say like what the pool? I guess is technically the first GM-less game.
The first GM-less.
No, sorry, not GM-less. Yeah, it's not GM-less at all. What am I talking about? The pool is not even slightly GM-less.
That's a good question. What was the first GM-less?
I feel like I knew this a second ago. It doesn't matter. It's not necessarily even.
Anyways, the fictional asymmetry thing shows up in Amber, where everyone has complete ownership over different domains. Like, I will always win on Warfare. Unless we change the domains around. Like, there's a lot of... We've got bits of this in some of the old games. We've got 2 GM games, like Wraith, back in the day. So, yeah, there's a lot there. So, we have a lot of questions that some folks have been kind enough to repost when my Twitch broke. So, let's go through those. How do you develop the center space to be strongly engaged by asymmetry in RPGs? Board games are great for this because you can have a shared space, the board, in which each group engages differently. But I'm not sure how to map that in an RPG. So what is the common element in a strongly asymmetrical game that people are interacting with, and how do you track that?
I think that largely depends on... Oh, go ahead, Caroline.
Yeah, I can speak to my 2 asymmetrical games. So Downfall was chosen to be asymmetric because I wanted to have a story focus on a single character, and I wanted to divide that responsibility up between players of antagonizing that character, challenging that character, and developing the world within play. So we all have a shared understanding of the world that we build together, and then we all have a shared goal of exploring the central character's story. In the game I'm currently working on, Fedor Noir, it's a similar dynamic where I want to tell a specific genre of story. So we have a shared idea of the kind of beats that a detective noir would follow. And likewise, we're focusing on a shared central story. The way I'm physically mapping that into a shared play space is with cards on the table. And I would imagine that my initial thought about the answer to that question is it's a tabletop RPG. We're sharing the space, the physical space of the table where we're laying down all of our information. Then we're sharing the narrative space of a story that we're creating together.
But I think I was about to answer that Caroline's exact same answer, except that like Downfall, for example, that we built this world together. We care about this world. We're not playing a bunch of different separate stories. we have a culture we build together, and that's what we care about. We care about the story of this one person. Like Kingdom, same thing. It's the kingdom is the thing that ties us together. And I think the question is very astute because you have to, I think, the more asymmetrical it is, the more you have to be like, but are we on the same page, and have to have something that really is tying us together in the fiction to make it interesting.
So I have seen information being the thing that ties everyone together. If I do this, then you know about it over there, so that hooks things up. And I've seen resources like currency in more practical perspective. Oh, I'm passing all the dice over here, so now you've got more dice over here, so you can play your game more interestingly. In one of my games, Posthuman Pathways, it's actually a common fictional setting, but you have 3 interweaving but separate storylines. So each of the characters may not ever run into each other, but they're sharing the same world and sort of viewing different lenses on the same world. But those are just a couple of the things I've seen. Any other answers to that, or should we go to the next question?
I would just echo what everyone else. Oh, go ahead.
No, go first.
Oh, I was just gonna say I would just echo what everyone else said. I think it kind of depends on those 3 categories you had talked about earlier, Jason. That kind of helps establish what the central thing is that we care about. I think I agree with it. It's a tabletop RPG, so it's the tabletop still unifies most of us, but then also the fictional space, the story that we all have buy-in towards. Yeah.
Perfect. All right.
Sasha?
Sorry, go.
Sasha.
No, the thing that I that I wanted to kind of link back to is we had earlier this talk about antagonism in storytelling games and how asymmetry can feed into that. And I think this also plays into we are not just developing the same story, which is obviously that's the thing that binds us together. We're developing a shared story, and somehow our stories are going to intersect. But the ways in which they intersect are bound by the goals of our characters or the thing we play. The ways those goals might run against each other and might interject or might help each other or one foul, different needs of our setting elements or elements that we play. And I think when we think about what these are, it can make for a very we can try to codify these in rules. When we talk about giving information to people, then yes, then it should be a thing that our characters care about information, and that is something that we can express in the rules or something. And I think, of course, we have the story as a center point, but I think these interwoven wants, needs, goals are a strong thing to think about when we think about how different asymmetric roles tie together.
All right. So one more question. Thank you for Chernado for reposting a question for Rubblewist. Asymmetrical game design can have an impact on the culture and social situation at the table. In some cases, this impact can be negative, at least negative for some players. So I'm wondering about how you think about the ways in which asymmetrical design might have unintended repercussions in the social relationships between players.
Sorry? Oh, sorry.
I think that was our 10-minute warning.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
I was like, what's my voice?
The way I think about that is, again, in my responsibility as a designer, and then again as a facilitator, in being very clear about what players are going to do when they make decisions about who they're playing or what role they're playing. Being clear about that when I'm facilitating, when I'm pitching the game, when I'm describing the game, people should know that this is a game where you might have a lot of control, you might have a little control, you might have control over these kind of things. When we're facilitating, being very mindful of keeping eyes on the table to see, to manage those transitions of power, if there are those within the game. But it is something, I think that's very important to think about, for sure.
I think it's definitely easier to make symmetry. Equality is easier because you can say, hey, I gave everyone the same tools. It's not my fault if things break down at the table. As a designer, I try to level the playing field, which is awesome. We should level the playing field. So designing asymmetrically is more challenging, just mechanically, right? Because like you got to have different widgets that still come out kind of interestingly and fairly, right? You want to be like, because you really don't want, you want any role in the game to be like, well, this role is terrible and no one's going to enjoy it. That would be no good. So it's harder, obviously, just mechanically so. Maybe that's why there's fewer asymmetrical games. I mean, maybe that's maybe that's part of the problem.
Sasha.
I think obviously there's like the way to design the roles themselves in a way where they don't have these consequences, but like I think we know from like just like very symmetric play too that these things can happen. So I think for me, like especially in asymmetric games, it's important for me to give forward some kind of tools for players to mitigate that damage, to like navigate these spaces. I think Wonder Home has a very good like set of things for that, which are like these which are things to say to other people while you play. Let's do this instead. Do we want to? Where to next? What do you think? Hold on, no, and walking away. Or like in Of Bodies, I gave like shared moves for players and GMs, which were ask for suggestions, ask follow-up questions, share your excitement, call for a pause, stop a scene, speak about what troubles you, and share your ideas. And the idea of those was to like think about the ways in which the different like loads that people can carry, the different roles can cause problems, and give them like tools to specifically address these. For example, if like if I have a role where I have like a lot of like storytelling agency and like have to carry a lot of that forward, I'm incredibly anxious about like fucking up. So like having other people share their excitement will be like pure like I don't know, a pure healing potion for me. Like because it just works wonders. So I give this tool in my games to like encourage people to do that. And yeah.
So one thing that I would love to see more experimentation with is moving past equality in games and moving to equity in games. I would love to see asymmetric games designed specifically to correct power imbalances, where there's rules hard-coded in place where if a male player talks over a female player, then there's a mechanical disincentive for this. Like, there's a lot of interesting social dynamics.
Sorry. That's just like, ugh, no way. Sorry.
There's a lot of interesting social dynamics that I think someone could intentionally play with to communicate different messages. Now, I'm not necessarily the one to do it, but I think that there's a space there that we haven't examined writ large. And there's one more question, and then I have to disappear because this panel's way too asymmetric right now. So the last question before people wrap up is, how do you account for helping players account for social power differentials that different game approaches and tools can create? How do you account for mechanical asymmetry informing social asymmetry? Which is the same broad topic, but a slightly different take on it.
I throw in, well, for the not exactly an asymmetrical game turn by turn, but as Caroline pointed out before, Microscope is asymmetric in the sense that when you choose the different moves you choose at any moment do very different things, but it actively deals with social imbalances by basically telling other players they have to shut up and wait while someone else. You can't make suggestions, you can't prompt people. Whose ever turn it is, it's their turn to make something up, and it could be something big, it could be something small, but it's your turn, and everyone else can just relax and wait and just be cool. It's a non-coaching, non-leaning on people game, and the fun of that is that then you're often surprised by people who previously in social situations would not contribute because they were just too shy or retiring, suddenly make amazing stuff or just anything, and everyone else is like, that's amazing, that's fantastic, and we all build on it. But that's a very blunt way to do it.
I'm disappearing. So people can find me at Genesis of Legend on Twitter.com or in the Concord Room in 5 minutes. Bye.
Hey, thanks, Jason.
Bye, Jason.
Thank you for moderating.
Hey,
Oh, no, now it's
I
chaos.
think don't some people have like some Kickstarters they want to talk about? Wasn't there some like? Do you ever?
I have one going on.
Yeah, I thought you had one you wanted to talk about at some point.
Oh, I mean, it's an extension on Slayers, which is my asymmetric game. The whole reason I'm here. I have a Kickstarter for a supplement for it called Dust Up right now. There's, I think, 9 days left on the campaign. Time doesn't mean anything anymore. But it's a supplemental zine that I'm working on with a very good friend of mine. And it's basically setting material. So it has lots of locations, NPCs, tables, adventure hooks, monsters, new class, because that's Slayer's whole thing, is that each class plays the game differently. So now you got a whole new way to play the game differently than you had before. So that's up on Kickstarter right now. I think if you just search Dust, you should probably find it.
Sasha, Caroline, what are you two working on?
Sasha, you want to go first?
No, you go first.
Okay, sure. So I'm working on a game called Fedor Noir right now, which is a collaboration between me and my buddy Morgan Stinson. It's a film noir game where the asymmetry in it is one player. There's 4 roles, another hard-coded number of players game, but there's 4 roles. There's the detective, the detective's partner, the detective's flame, the romantic interest, and the detective's hat. And the asymmetry comes in between the character of the detective is split between 2 players. One player, the detective, narrates the detective's actions and speech, and the hat is their inner monologue a la film noir. So it plays with very separated player roles, and right now, as I'm playtesting, it's about finding balance between those and finding support between those. Because when it works well, it has a very fun dramatic interplay. And yeah, I'm working on that. Probably launch that Kickstarter around March. We'll see. I don't know. Time again is meaningless.
You also get to say you're a hat, which is really fun.
Yeah,
Like,
one player
I'm
gets
the
to be the hat.
That is so cool.
That's
so
super cool.
cool.
I'm very excited about it.
Sasha, what about you? What are you up to?
Well, currently I'm designing 2 games. One of them is incredibly symmetric, because it's a like ratchet hack for multiple players. It's about playing one person that slowly becomes a place. It's
Wait, what?
kind of
Tell us more.
That's awesome.
well, I'm kind of trying to merge the storytelling elements of Annihilation and Dark Souls into like
Cool.
this game of exploring a extremely weird place, like that's where things have happened and things are continuing to happen, and they are slowly transforming you and all the people you meet, and slowly one after another all the people you meet are turning into places, and when you turn into place the game is over. Oh, and maybe until then you have discovered the mystery of the place, or you didn't. Probably you didn't.
Can we play again? Can we play again and go in the place that you became? Can we do that?
Oh,
I want to sequel that. I want to do that. I want to do
Ooh,
that.
that's
Oh
good.
god, I need to think about that because that's really cool. The thing is, you
Be
will
so
go into the
good.
places that were once the people you know.
Yeah.
So that's going to happen. Yeah, and
Okay.
also I'm working on a BOB game. That's with a partner, which is going to be about a revolutionary food truck, and which gives food to the people, and that's going to involve like people drawing setting elements, and for like in BOB style setting elements, and has some like ideas about how people can skip their turns if they don't want to have the narrative agency of a setting element and stuff like that. Yeah.
Did you say the name of the game with the locations? Did you have a title for that yet?
Oh, that's Valley of Mist. Like
Valley of Mist?
Yeah, I'm currently not. I'm not settled on
Got
that
it.
one because City of Mist
Yeah.
exists. And
Yeah.
that's kind of problematic. But like Valley of Mist is a good name for what it is.
Names are terrible. Names are hard.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Never name
Guys,
anything.
raise a glass for
Yeah.
having to name things. I hate naming things. It's just
Yeah,
the worst.
I hope I can-
never name another game. Never again.
Yeah. I hope it can push it into playtest like this month. But yeah, let's see.
Yeah.
Are we out?
our
Ben, are
project
you
is
up
so
to anything?
awesome. Yeah.
I think he just did our ghost in the shell just tell us we were out? Okay. Happy election, everybody. Woohoo!
Uh-huh.
Ben, are you
Oh.
working on anything?
I'm just being happy about the election for the moment. I just finished up the second edition Kingdom Kickstarter, and now I'm just basking in this lovely Saturday. So
Wonderful.
Thank you, everyone. It was really wonderful to talk to you all.
Yeah.
It's really nice meeting you
Fantastic.
all. This is
Yeah.
this is
yeah,
really
really
wonderful.
interesting. I gotta say, it's really fascinating to meet. I don't mean this in a bad way, but like young developers making interesting stuff. I think that's fantastic. I mean, I think Spencer, you said you just got into this like this year, really, game design.
Yeah, the quarantine basically opened this up as a possibility for me.
Silver lining.
Awesome.
So
And
I'm
Sasha, oh, sorry.
I'm a professor by day, and so I get my
Yeah.
teaching done, and then at night I'm like, all right, well, I guess I could either grade
Teacher
or I
high
can
five.
make games.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
100%. And Sasha, are you pretty new? You said, I think, in the design space.
Yeah, I started publishing games on itch last summer. Did
Yeah, nice.
like 9 games of different size, like some like one pages
Yeah.
and one like I think my longest like 30 pages. So yeah, like for me the COVID just kind of did the opposite of slowing me down a lot because just
Yeah.
threw my days over and I couldn't find time as well as before. But I like my last big game like came out in February, March. So I hope that I'm getting Valley of Mist done soon because I want to have like a bigger one published, and I'm thirsting to publish one again.
Yeah.
Let's talk about asymmetrical game experiences. Pandemic asymmetric game experience right there. Very different. Very different. Yeah.